All right, hello there, thrill seekers. Some people recently have been asking me for writing advice, and this comes up every once in a while. And whenever something like this happens, where I get a bunch of emails or other correspondence all at the same time on the same subject, I think, well, maybe there's something going on out there, and maybe I should address this. And in the recent month or so, I've gotten several emails or other term forms of correspondence in which people ask me for advice about writing and being a professional writer. And so I thought I'd see what I could say about that. And I feel like, I don't know, a lot of times I think people are looking for like this secret thing that's going to turn them into a professional writer, and that me being a professional writer would know that secret thing. I just don't. There isn't a secret thing. I'll just tell you my history vis-a-vis writing. I can remember writing short stories when I was still living in Africa. So we came back from Africa, my family came back from Africa just after I turned 11 years old, a few months after my 11th birthday. So sometime before I was 11 years old, I was already writing. I was writing short stories, and I was making little amateur comic books that were terrible. My parents used to have one preserved in a scrapbook, and I remember looking. This is even years ago since I looked at this, and going, "Oh God, this is awful. I don't even know what it's about," But I was finding my way even then. So all through high school, I was writing short stories. Didn't really think about publishing them. I would just write them and put them away. When I got out of high school, I didn't think being a professional writer was a legitimate was something I'd ever be able to do, but I kept doing it anyway. I kept writing little short stories, and I also got into songwriting because for reasons I can't explain, I thought maybe I had more of a shot at that than as a book writer. So I did those albums that I've talked about, the Dementia 13 albums. And my main interest in music at the time was in songwriting. I wasn't so much interested in the other parts of it. I wasn't terribly interested in performing, for example. I just wanted to write songs and get into the craft of writing songs. And I think I became okay at it. I think I became good but not great at writing songs. And there are a few, if you want to go look at my songs, some of them that I've put up, I would point to Samantha as being one that's good. I would put out Hits Are Everything as a song that's good as a song, as a piece of songwriting. So, I got to be okay at it. I got to be good, not great. So I went to Japan and ended up working for a television production company that made a show called Ultraman that I really loved. And while I was there, I got to know Masakazu Mikita, who was the kind of head writer for a while for the Ultraman shows, and tried to submit things. And Mikita-san and me collaborated on an episode of Ultraman that got very close to airing, but it didn't make it. It got cut at the last minute and substituted with somebody else's script because they were too many problems with the one that we were working on. In the meantime, I still kept writing. I submitted a few short stories to science fiction magazines because science fiction magazines were one of the few places where you could sell a short story. I got two published, one in a very, very minor science fiction magazine, I think it was maybe British, that had a circulation of a couple hundred copies, really small, and another published in a magazine that was aimed at expats in Japan. So I got two short stories. It was an English language magazine published for English-speaking people living in Japan. Two short stories got published. Sorry, I got interrupted. There was a delivery I had to go sign for. I think I was talking about novels. So I heard novels were a better sell than short fiction. So I wrote 3 entire novels that I couldn't get published at the time. One came very close to being published, but the publisher walked away at the last minute. I'd been talking to an editor at some publisher, And she was very enthusiastic about the book, but she couldn't get her bosses behind it, so it never happened. So that came close. And what I finally did was I still wanted to write, so my two Zen teachers, Tim McCarthy and Gudo Nishijima Roshi, were both always telling me I should write a book about Zen. And I always thought, I can't write a book about Zen, because I would see the books on the shelves in the Barnes & Noble or wherever about Zen and go, I can't write one of those. They're all sweet and nice, and I'm not a sweet, nice person. And I have this history of being in punk rock bands and doing all the, not the kind of Birkenstock wearing, incense smelling, hemp clothes wearing kind of vegan hippie garbage. I couldn't write that, but I thought, well, I'll just write it anyway because I wanted to keep writing. I was into writing, and this is the key. So I wrote this book, the book that eventually became Hardcore Zen, although it was called Sit Down and Shut Up when I wrote it. That was my working title for it, which eventually became the title of my second book. But so I wrote this book, and when I finished it, I looked at it and I thought, well, this is nothing like any Zen book I've ever seen before. So therefore, nobody's going to publish it. I just thought, well, this is just it. And I thought at the time Tower Records was still a going concern, was still in business, and they would take any kind of zine. It seemed like they would put all kinds of self-published magazines and stuff on at the magazine stands at Tower Records. So I thought that I would self-publish this stuff, what eventually became Hardcore Zen, as 10 issues of a zine about Zen. That was my plan for it. But in the meantime, I knew how you sent books to publishers because I'd done it already. I looked at the publisher's guide and all these things that they tell you how to do it. And so I knew the process. I'd done it many times before. With all three of those novels, I'd gone through the process. So I just put a thing together, and I found, I think, 5 Buddhist publishers that were accepting submissions. So I just sent it out to those 5 publishers, thinking, well, that's that. And I wasn't really going to push it any farther than that because I thought, well, I'll just get 5 publishers to send me 5 rejection slips, and then I'll just do my zine thing. And lo and behold, Wisdom Publications came back to me and said they wanted to publish this book, which surprised the hell out of me. So the point of telling you that whole story is to tell you that it wasn't easy for me. I first started writing when, let's say, I was 10 years old. By the time Hardcore Zen got published, I was 39. I think at the time that it was published, yeah, I was 39. So that's 29 years of failure at becoming a professional writer before I ever became a professional writer. So that's got to tell you something. So the writing, I don't know how good my writing advice is for you. I never took writing classes, but I paid close attention to the books and stories that I read. I remember going through short stories and novels that I particularly liked and diagramming them. So I would figure out how they were constructed, sort of back engineering, you might call it. So looking at the book and then trying to figure out what are the bones of it. Like, when is the main character introduced? What does he say? How is he described? How many lines does it take, lines of dialogue or description does it take to get from this scene to that scene? How it all was put together. So I looked at these things really closely to try to understand the mechanics of it so that I could apply that to my own work. So even though I didn't take classes in writing, I did the kind of things that you do in a writing class. I also read books about how to write. The only one that I can remember off the top of my head is, I believe it's called On Writing by Stephen King. And if it's not called On Writing, it's called something similar. But Stephen King, famous horror novelist, wrote a book about writing that I found very good. One book I didn't find very useful, it might surprise you, was called The Zen of Writing by Ray Bradbury. And I think Ray Bradbury is a great writer, but I read The Zen of Writing, but I don't remember getting anything particularly useful from that book. Although maybe if I read it again, I'd think differently of it. But there are a lot of books out there. So maybe Bradbury's book is really good because it's been 20 or 30 years since I read it. So who knows? Maybe that was my opinion then and wouldn't be my opinion now. But there's a lot of books out there, and there are a lot of websites, and there's probably YouTube videos that'll tell you about the process. The other thing is you gotta want to do it. You got to want to write. Meaning, if you are fixated on publishing, if you're fixated on the reason I am writing this book is so it will get published, that's, I think, a recipe for disaster, because most of what you write won't get published. You got to practice. You gotta do it a lot before you get good at it. It's the same with anything. The same as if you want to be a good basketball player, you got to play a lot of basketball. You got to lose a lot of games. If you want to become a good wrestler, if you want to become a good guitar player, you got to play lousy guitar for years, which I did. I played lousy guitar for years and years until I got to be a good guitar player. I'm not a great guitar player, but I'm good. You can look at the videos and judge for yourself. I'm good. I'm not. Maybe not in world-class territory, but I'm not bad. But that came from practice. And the same with writing. Most of what I write doesn't go anywhere. I spent yesterday about 5 hours trying to write something that I felt like at the time that I sat down to write it this is the thing I want to write. And once I got through with those 5 hours, I was exhausted and depressed, and looked at what I wrote and thought, this is no good at all, and I might as well delete it. And that's what happens more often than not. I have a lot more of that than days when I write something good. Sometimes something comes out very freely and flows well. My book, The Other Side of Nothing, one of the reasons I like that book so much, it's my latest book, is because that one flowed. That one was easy to write, and nearly everything I wrote with the eye of putting it into that book actually made it into the book. Other books have been a slog. So you gotta like it. That's the point. And I think this is maybe, if there is a Zen lesson in this video, it's that. It's that there's no way you're gonna become a professional writer or any kind of successful writer at any level than to just then if you like it, you have to like the process of writing, because as I say, most of what you write is not going to be published and is not going to be worth publishing. I mean, the only people who get everything they write published are people like Stephen King, and it's only because his name sells so well that if he wrote a shopping list, it would probably be on the bestsellers, because people just love his writing so much. But if you're not one of those guys, most of what you write isn't going to get published. So you just gotta face that, and you gotta understand that, and you gotta just like doing it. And if you like doing it, you'll probably be able to get good enough to find an audience, but also don't expect to make a lot of money off of it. I mean, this is why I make these videos. This is why I have this YouTube channel, because I don't make enough money from writing books. I thought, if you would have asked me, I would have thought a guy who is 20 years, it's been nearly 20 years since I first published a book. Yeah, it's been exactly 20 years because it came out in 2003. Hardcore Zen did. That after 20 years, I would be making it as a professional writer, and I'm still not. The main thing that pays the bills, as I always say at the end of these videos, is the people donating to see these videos. Publishing royalties are terrible. I get a couple $1,000s a year on a good year from just book sales. seriously. Audiobooks actually make more on audiobooks but I still couldn't make a living even if it was just from the audiobooks. I still wouldn't be able to quit my day job. The only thing that's allowed me to quit my day job, as I said, are these YouTube videos. So that's the other thing. If you're doing it for an aim, this is the Zen lesson here. Anything you do, this is what goalless practice is about. Here you go. Here's the actual meat of this. If you want a Zen lesson from this, the goalless practice in writing is writing for the sake of writing. That's how it appears when you apply it to writing. That's what we mean when we say goalless practice in Zazen. You're doing Zazen for the sake of doing Zazen and not for some other thing that you hope to get out of doing the Zazen. The same thing with writing. If you want to do it well, you write just for the sake of writing. This is why Hardcore Zen was also a good book, because I wrote Hardcore Zen without any intention of... Well, I had the intention to maybe publish it. I think that was kind of in the back of my mind, but I didn't care whether I could sell it to a publisher or whether I could convince a large audience to buy it. I thought maybe there are people out there who might benefit from this book, but it's not going to be enough to make me any money, and probably I'll lose money by printing it up myself and sending it off to Tower Records and all that. But I thought, well, it's fine. I had another job at the time, and I could afford to spend a little bit of money on a hobby. So that's the way I looked at it. You got to look at it that way. You got to look at it just from the point of view, and that's the main thing. The other stuff you can learn anywhere. There's a ton of books that can teach you writing technique. There's a ton of books that'll tell you how to submit something to a publisher or how to submit something to an agent. I still don't have a literary agent. I've been doing this for 20 years and I do not have a literary agent. I had a literary agent for about 2 years of my career, but she gave up on me. So that's that. So I've never had an agent. But you can find that, I'm sure, back in my day, it was all done through books. These days, you could probably find websites or video tutorials about how to do it. It's just a process, what you put together. And you can learn the mechanics of it. That's another thing. Learn the fundamental mechanics. That's the other piece of advice I'd give you. Like I did it through just studying how books were written, but you gotta get that down. Some friend of mine a few years ago had written a novel, and he wanted me to take a look at it. And I couldn't get through more than 3 pages of his novel because he didn't understand the basics of writing. Like, he didn't understand that you can't change the point of view character in a novel 2 or 3 times a paragraph, and you can't change the tense of your sentence. You can't go from past tense to present tense to future tense, and back and forth. It's too confusing to the reader, and he didn't know that you had to put dialogue in a separate paragraph. You shouldn't put, if you're putting lines of dialogue, each person should have their own paragraph. You can't put several people's dialogue in the same paragraph and expect the reader to be able to follow that. He didn't know those, and that made it. He didn't know those kind of basic things. And it made it impossible for me to get through more than 3 pages of his book. And after a while, I was exhausted, and I couldn't. It was like 300 and some pages. I couldn't do it. So learn those basics, and then you can learn, how to submit things. But expect to be disappointed. Expect to get rejected. Expect to get a ton of rejections, and that's just part of the process. And the rejections don't mean that you're fundamentally no good. It just means that whoever you sent it to, it didn't appeal to them, and they may have good reasons for rejecting it. I recently looked at those 2 short stories that I published because I found them in a box that I'd had hidden when we were moving. I found them, and I was appalled. I was amazed in one sense that those even got published because they were so bad. So, just expect to be bad for a while. You have to be bad for a while, and you have to be thick-skinned enough to let people tell you that this isn't good, and to just keep going in spite of that you're not going to appeal to everybody, and that maybe there's good reason. I have to admit, at the time I would be angry when I got rejected. by somebody for yet another story that I'd sent, and then reflecting back on it, I go, oh yeah, I was rejected because that story was bad. It was just a bad story. And no matter how much I loved it at the time, I have to admit it was not good. So, be prepared to be not good. But the zen of writing is to do writing as a goalless practice. So there you go. All right, if you want to donate to me, as I said, your donations are what keeps me afloat. So I really appreciate it. You can go to the URL on the screen, hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen.info/donate. You will find my PayPal and Patreon links there, and that is how I make my living, as I said, not from book royalties, not from speaking fees, but from those donations. That's where I think 90% of my income is coming from, is your donations. So I appreciate it. But as always, you don't got to donate if you don't want to donate. Also, speaking of speaking fees, I will be going to Europe I think I'm leaving in a week. I'm departing on August 10th. So for most of the month of August, I will be in Europe, and the dates are on the screen that you can see. I'm going to England, Finland, and Germany. And as far as I know, all of those retreats are still accepting people to come to them. You might have to twist Benedictus Hoff's arms to get them to let you in at this late a date, but I've heard from people that even they will let sometimes people come in at the last minute. So try. And here is the URL where you can find those clickable links. You can go to hardcorezen.info/events. Then you will find clickable links to those various events. I don't have links for the Bozeman, Montana event yet, but I'm sure I'll get those soon. But all the European ones I have links for. Okay, we will see you next time. Have a good time all the time. Bye. Hey Ziggy, I'm sick of being a professional writer. I want to have your job. Your job is just laying on that bed and being cute. That's a good job. That looks like a good job. And everybody loves you. Oh, who's here? All right, we'll go see who's here. And we'll talk to you later, Ziggy. Maybe that's your Nana. Is that her, Ziggy? Is that her? Is that who you were waiting for? Yeah, I think it is.